Ba-da-da-ba, bum, 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 ba-da-ba-ba.
Oh my gosh. Bonus, when you watch the video version of this podcast, you get to watch our little dances, which won't be present in the eventual audio podcast. Just a little plant there. Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of Breaking the Barriers. We are here today to talk about soul level contracts and what the heck that means, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions in the world about what it means to be contracted to another being. And we're going to try and break through some of those misconceptions today, have a conversation as we always do. So, Red, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Red Moonigal. I'm a psychic catalyst, a teacher, and a healer. I love talking with Safrianna. She asks the most amazing questions. Talking about soul level contracts is something that I talk about all of the time. If you're also interested in other things that I do have a website at Arise Healing Center, and you are more than welcome to schedule a one-on-one conversation. Just FYI, that's out there too.
Yes, absolutely. Red's work getting into your blueprint is absolutely incredible. And what we're talking about today is one of the many things that can come up in those conversations. So, just in case you don't know me, I'm Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I actually help people translate their blueprints with Red. That's part of what I do in the world now.
And
Nice
you are
new little
epic
bonus.
at it, Safi. I love that you do that. I feel like I've needed an interpreter my whole life for what I do. I love this.
But yes, I work with people in their blueprints as well, so they can, as I say, get out of their own way so they can heck and slay and be here to do what they're meant to do. So we're joined. Welcome, Pamela and Saris. Glad to see you here live today. Let's just dive right in. So soul contracts. What exactly is a soul contract? Let's just start there with some definitions.
Well, I think that the best way to describe a soul contract is that it's an agreement. It's an agreement that both entities that are here living in the meat suit in their higher multidimensional quantumly connected self says, hey, I would like to take the relationship that we have as entities and I'd like to bring that into this experience. And there are many different kinds of contracts. There's many different configurations. And some of them are limited, like they only are for a little time. Sometimes they are for a big time. Sometimes they're your entire life. Sometimes it's a hiccup, like a random meeting that you know somebody for a week. That could be a soul contract. Like they are, if you can think of a situation, that's probably a soul contract. It can be. And
Yes.
not everything is a soul contract.
Yes. And I think so. We're probably not going to get into this today. It's probably going to be a future episode, but I just want to plant a seed here that a lot of us have really romanticized the idea of being attached to another entity, whether it be a human being or an animal companion or, an ancestor, whatever it might be. We really want these special bonds. So we want there to be a special connection, and we want to say every relationship that feels special has something cosmic or, predetermined behind it, that it's fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it. So unpacking this is really important for us because it's about breaking down hierarchy in some way, because just because you have a soul contract with an entity doesn't mean that that connection is necessarily more important or special or anything. It's just an agreement. And I see it as, we're at the cosmic bus stop getting ready to reincarnate, and we're kind of hanging out with a bunch of other entities also getting ready. And we kind of have these conversations where we're like, hey, you want to come and we'll do a thing in life together where this is going to help me break through my karma around fear, or this is going to help me establish my business someday and like do what I'm meant to do in my mission. Like, so we have these little conversations at the cosmic bus stop, and we sign some things into our blueprint. But again, not every relationship is that way. It's actually very few, wouldn't you say, that are actually contracted?
I would say that we don't, generally speaking, overburden ourselves with too many. I think that if you start looking at every single intimate relationship or every single person that you care about or love is this cosmically divine, multi-layered, weighted, I like to say weighted relationship, because contracts, specifically, I think the ones people romanticize about that generally kind of don't really exist the way they romanticize them about, that's a whole thing. There can be a weight. There can feel like this is more than something else. And I don't want to dismember that belief or that felt sense, because everybody's felt sense is important, right? I don't want to invalidate anybody's feelings or emotions or any of that. And I think that's a good caveat to put into the discussion of soul level contracts, because you can feel extraordinarily deeply about a connection, and that doesn't mean it's not real. The other person may not feel that. And that might mean that you have a lesson to learn in this. There might be a contract between you and that other person, but they haven't reciprocated that contract. That can be a real thing. And you take those kinds of differences, those levels of feelings and impressions and felt senses in the world. And then we add the dynamic of trauma and karma and social expectations and fantasy ideals of what relationships are and toxic relationship. You add all these other things into it, and it can become a minefield of, well, is what I'm feeling real? Because
Mhm.
you don't, I like to tell people all the time, what you feeling is real. I don't ever want to dismiss somebody's feelings. And also, your felt sense of something might not be reciprocated. That doesn't mean what you're feeling isn't real. It just might not be perceived or reciprocated or felt from the other person. It doesn't mean that your feelings aren't valid. It just also means that you can't expect somebody to reciprocate that if there's no contract there, and or if there's all this other stuff, right? Like you're a
Right.
counselor, you understand that there's a lot of dynamics here.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really hard to pack it all into a 40-minute conversation, but um the foundation, the definition of a contract is that agreement. There are many different kinds, and one of the things I encourage people all the time to do is learn how to communicate with as many different kinds of people and many different kinds of relationships as possible, to
Mhm.
start to learn to tease out what are those soul contracts versus what is not, and what different kinds there are. Because when you communicate with people, you get their input, you find out what's actually happening with them versus what you're having happen, you can start to learn genuinely what these different things are. And you don't know that because you only know yourself until you learn how to
Mm.
communicate.
Right. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about these different types, because you're
Mhm.
again, we really want to have every relationship be something special. I think that we do believe if we have a contract with somebody that it's going to be lifelong. And you've already implied, no, there's all these different types of contracts. So we have the short term, we have the long
Mhm.
term, we have the lifelong. We have bi-directional contracts where we've signed on
Yep.
and we agree that we're working together on something. And then
Yes.
there's one-sided contracts where
Mhm.
one person is attached to the other and the other is doing less in that connection or providing something in a totally different way, but there's not
I
that
like I
attachment,
think
I guess.
I like to think of it this way. When you go buy a car and you get a car loan and you sign a contract, who's the one doing most of the work in that contract? You
Mm.
are, right? Like you're making the payments. You have to keep the car up. You have to make sure it gets fixed. If you're in an accident, like who's culpable in that accident? Like you have to own your responsibility. You have to own your ownership, your actions, your behaviors in that accident, right? Now, granted, if the accident's not your fault, still there's this, where is the ownership, and do you still have to pay the car loan back, right? Like you still have to pay that loan. There's still a contract there. That's very much a one-sided. That's that one-sided contract. Um Bilateral contracts are more of a it's kind of almost like an employer-employee even, or a coworker contract. Like you go to work and your teammate and you are working on a project. You're getting paid by the overlord of whoever, right? And your contract with each other is to fulfill the assignment, right? Like you're doing the
Mhm.
thing. I don't know who the overlord is in this analogy. I just pulled that out of everywhere, but there is no overlord in the universe, so I don't know where that goes. But it is kind of like a coworker project type contract. That's what bilateral contracts are. Each person's responsible for their own participation in that project and the outcomes. And in an ideal world, right? Like you both get equal praise, you get equal pay, you get equal all the things, right? That's
Everybody
I'm
benefits.
using I'm talking about the ideal version. We all know that
Yeah.
our world doesn't function that way, but anyway.
Yeah.
And then you have contracts that are interestingly like situational group contracts. Those are kind of a macro contract where you know that you're participating in a project, right? But you don't know who your teammates are going to be until you meet them on a Zoom call, right? Like this organization is worldwide and you've signed up to discover how whales talk in the ocean, right? And you join a call and you know they're probably all going to be maybe marine biologists and sound techs and people who've studied language and behavior. You have all these specialties that come in to have a contract for this project. And those are big group contracts. And I'm in that big Zoom call and there's 500 people on that call, right? Do I have an intimate relationship with all 500? Probably not. But there might be 4 or 5 of them on that call, that one could be in Portugal and Australia and France, and I feel closer to them. Does
Mhm.
that mean that weight of that contract is different than the rest of the group? Absolutely not. I'm part of a group contract for a purpose. So,
So,
you see how big that can get really quickly?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think about the big world-changing movements and activism, and I can't help but
Yep.
wonder how many contracted groups have
Mhm.
come in to change the trajectory of,
There's quite a few.
the direction things are going in humanity at different points in time. And
Yep.
so the bi-directional, 2 people that are in a contract can
Mhm.
also have a similar project purpose driven
They
contract.
can.
What I'd like to tease out here is this idea, a lot of people think that a contract is going to equate to a legal contract or an
No.
intimate relationship
Nope.
or things like that. And that is not the
Yep.
case at all. So,
Nope.
what are the different kinds of reasons that we might contract together? We've got purpose
Um,
driven, mission driven, changing the world. We've got
Karma.
unpacking karma.
Yeah, karma. Um, it could be I'm trying to think of an example of a more of a micro version of a bilateral contract. Um, Maybe you've got one person that is really struggling lifetime after lifetime with the same karmic circles. They may choose to be in a contract with someone that they've been in a contract with before. So maybe they were married to him in another life, or they were their brother or sister or their best friend in another life. And in this life, they choose to have a more intimate, maybe interpersonal or closer friendship relationship, as in that other person is there, not caught in as much karma. They're not pulling from the same lives. They're not pulling from the lives that they even shared before. They're not pulling from any of the same things because they're trying to stay outside of the morass of that sticky, tight spiral that this other entity is struggling with. And they might be there to just maybe ease this other soul out of that really tightly compacted karmic circle. And it might take a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
Or it might only be for a couple years, right? Or maybe that person in that relationship helps you out of that tight karmic circle, but then you've got another soul contract with someone else that helps you out of the next level. Like that first one, they're not at
Mhm.
that level. They're not bringing that information with them this time to be at that level, right? We in relationships is really funny. I talk to people all the time. They're like, I feel like I've outgrown my partner, or I feel like I've done all these things and they're just not willing to be there with me. And I'm like, yeah, that could be a thing.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. And I get a lot of like surprise, like, well, but I thought I was to be with this person to help them. It since I've done it, why can't they do it? And I'm like, that might not be the way it's written.
Yeah,
There's no
and it's
shame
impossible
in
to
any of it.
really unpack what's
Yeah,
really written, and that's
yeah,
that's a thing that I think we really struggle with as humans. We
yeah.
wanna have the answers, we wanna have the certainty, we wanna be able to crack open the Akashic records and see exactly what's and then whole other
No,
conversation we've had, but,
whole other
you know, we
conversation. No.
we want that certainty, and we really can't get it to this degree that we really want in this life,
You
more
know,
than
I
likely.
think I think that one of the things I've learned about soul contracts from my guides over and over and over again, because I want to know what's in my blueprint. I desperately
Mhm.
want to know. And
We all do.
I get a lot of the no affect. No. They're just not answering me.
Right.
Like, I have a busy auditory dialogue with guides all the time. When it gets dead silent, I probably asked the wrong question. Um, but soul contracts are what give us the support in our lives for the things that we're journeying through. And it can be confusing to think that you have this deep heartfelt connection with someone and you've been told that that must mean that you're in love, right? The in love phrase, which I wish I could throw that into the garbage can and never ever see that again. um that in love perspective is I'm going to back this up with go backwards to move forwards to say I have said this over and over and over again. There are two really big emotions in the world, love and fear. And fear can be transmuted into love. So, what is the biggest emotion, the biggest thing we can feel as entities in a meat suit? Love. And when you have as much hate as there is in the world, that's a lot of fear. Hate and fear are the same
Mhm.
damn thing that just manifests in different behaviors, right?
Right.
But that can be transmuted, that can be changed, that can be transformed into love. And we are infinite loving, quantumly connected, multidimensional entities by nature, by who we are really. And when people ask me, like, well, I want to know what's in my blueprint, I'm like, do you love yourself?
The
That's a
biggest
tricky
question
question,
of
right?
them all.
And there is something about our Western culture that says you're not allowed to love yourself without becoming a narcissist or a sociopath or someone
Yep.
that's damaged.
Yep.
And I will be eternally grateful to my higher self that I chose not to have empathy in this world because the empathic gift is what I'm talking about. I don't want to confuse anybody. Um, is not something I need to know that I care with the deepest levels of every fiber of every cell. I love so much. I care so much.
Mhm.
I'm trying really hard not to cry here because that always happens when I go there. It is such deep, a deep felt thing with every single entity I meet.
Yeah.
It is the hardest thing in the world when you want to understand your soul contract connections, when you love and care everyone, like everyone is loving, everyone is beautiful, everyone
Yep.
is this infinite loving being, no matter how they perceive themselves in the world, no matter how they act in the world. And they can be pretty awful with each other. We're
Yeah.
seeing that right now. There's some pretty awfulness going on, right? And somehow I still never not know that that one badly behaving human is this beautiful, loving, compassionately infinite loving entity. And so
Yeah.
when we look at soul contracts, when you can feel that love, you want that to be reciprocated, right? We all want that connection. We're
Mhm.
social creatures. We want that connection. We all are. I don't care how isolating you think you are and how much of a hermit, you still need connection. And
Hermit here, still need connection.
absolutely. And the soul connection piece, I've learned to lean into, does it matter to me who has a soul contract with me? To me, it
Right.
doesn't, because
Yeah.
I trust that the ones that are contracted to me or me to them, that because I know that I'm a loving entity at my core and that I'm living a human experience, I'm going to fuck up and I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to hurt somebody and I'm going to do a shitty thing at some point. Having done that, been a human before, like I'm living it. I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to give myself all the compassion in the world to do that, to make
Yeah.
those mistakes. And soul contracts teach us about that interconnection and that infinite love. And when you have a bilateral soul group connection, what I have learned is that it really does reinforce that we are loving entities.
Mhm.
And I think that fundamentally, we have these bilateral contracts. No matter who we are, we have bilateral contracts. Doesn't matter if you have a, we're not going to say that other phrase because I don't want to go
We're
there.
gonna come back to that
Um,
in a whole other episode because we're gonna get on our
we're going to
soapboxes
crack
there, I'm
that
sure.
open. But a bilateral contract does teach us about unconditional love. It teaches us
Mhm.
about loving one another with all the facets of who we are and how we manifest. And it teaches us how hard it is to love and have all the infinite emotions that go into that and still hurt someone and still it be painful and it be complex. Oh my god,
Yeah.
it's not easy. I know how to simplify things and I know that I can sound like I minimalize things, but it's not simple
Yeah.
in how we experience it. The foundation of your blueprint is complex, but also kind of simple. That doesn't mean it's easy, right?
Nothing in the universe in the midst of chaos and separation is quote unquote easy because we're
Yeah.
all, that's I can't help but go back to this. We're all one, right? And
Yeah.
so regardless of if you are contracted in this lifetime or not, we're still all one.
Mhm.
And you're going to be contracted to a bunch of different beings, entities in different lifetimes. And so when we put that too much importance on it, we also probably stress the contract and the actual connection that's capable of being there. And like Astra's looking up at you with love, isn't
She
she?
is. She's like, "Mom, I love you." And I'm
Mom,
like,
I love
"Well,
you.
I love you too."
Sweet Astra. But what I'm ultimately hearing is at the simplest terms, right? We can't simplify, but at its simplest
Mm.
terms, we sign up for these contracts either for purpose or to unpack karma. Those are the two
Yeah.
main reasons that we would opt
Yeah.
in together. And so, to give a couple examples here of what that might look like, there are families
Mhm.
that have somebody who comes in to kind of be the heavy lifter, green frequency.
Yep.
We've talked about this in other episodes if you want to go back and listen, but a green frequency person is coming in to help people unpack their karma, and they
Mhm.
might come in with a contract to help their family or
Yep.
not. They might
Or
just
not.
be green off doing green things, not with their family. It could be with other people.
Yep.
But that contract is there for a purpose.
Yep.
We wanted it there
Mhm.
for a reason
Yep.
ultimately. And so we need to empower ourselves to allow it to be what it needs to be rather than trying to kind of mind over matter or figure and
Yeah.
puzzle every little piece out. Because then we're overthinking and we're not just in the connection and in the contract, in the
Yeah.
relationship.
I've seen greens that come into families where they're contracted with the family to be that heavy lifter until the family chooses not to accept it.
Mm,
And then that green has all these other choices that open up in their blueprint to give them other journeys, other contracts to meet. I mean, there are so many different kinds of contracts. There are families where I have seen it. I've seen a mom and a dad get married. They've been married for 20, 30 years or whatever. Um, they have their 3 kids or 4 kids or whatever, and maybe 2 of the kids are actually like bilaterally contract with one of the parents, not both of them.
Mhm.
I've seen it where a kid's born into a family that there was like a temporary contract, like they had a contract with their mom to be born, but the mom isn't the primary contract. The dad is the contract for maybe a little while. And then both contracts are done. And that child's contract is no longer with their biological parents. Doesn't mean they don't have a relationship or potentially couldn't have one. I'm not saying that. I'm just
Right.
saying that the contract's over. And then that child who becomes an adult and goes out and lives their life has different contracts. And there can be a lot of like shame, fear, disappointment, like, oh, I'm disappointed in myself. Why can't I feel more connected to my family in this dynamic way that my sister feels or my brother feels, or that I see other people have? Or, yeah, I completely heart all of my parents and love my family, but I just don't feel like I belong to them. And I feel like I have my purposes over here. Like, legit, that's okay.
But yeah, that
Um,
was, my experience. Just to give a little bit of a
yeah,
story there. Like when I found out I wasn't contracted to my biological family, I felt less crazy
yeah,
because I was like, Okay, I'm not a sociopath with no
no,
feeling and attachment. Like
no,
there's something to this that I love them
yeah,
just as much as I would love any other human. But that
yeah,
attachment piece, the purpose or the karma, neither of those exist. And so there's just no contract. They're another person, part of the whole. That's wonderful and beautiful and great. But I had that
yeah,
social, because again, that's so much of the misconception is we think we're all contracted to like everybody or our families all the time or anybody that we date or literally like we're applying these contracts everywhere thinking that
no,
we're more enmeshed. And
no.
I think sometimes it's an excuse to put up with bad behavior. So that's
Oh,
a whole
yeah.
other that's a whole
That's a
other
whole other
soapbox I
thing.
could get on.
One of the things that I wanted to point out with soul contracts is that you can have these soul contracts not just with people in the human body, but with
Mhm.
your team, your
That's
blueprint
one of my
team,
questions I
right?
was gonna ask is, like, are we contracted to all of our
You
guides?
can. Yeah, actually, I think there's a base if you have guides in your team, I think there's a baseline contract with that.
Mhm.
I've never really had I've never had any guides really explain a whole lot of detail that I can remember. Generally, when they give me new information, they let me remember it, but I don't think I have ever gotten that question answered completely. I also sometimes get answers like, "Is that really all that important? Do you need to know?" And I usually take that as a, "They're not gonna answer that question. It's good
Yeah.
to know." Um, but there is something about how we can have certain kinds of guides in our team that what I call blueprint protectors. So
Mhm.
there's the intersectionality. I like to use the car driving example. I don't know why, but this one's the one that I come back to all the time. You're
It
driving down
works.
the road, you get to a four-way stoplight, okay? And there's cars in every intersection, and your light turns green. Okay. You look both ways like you're supposed to. No cars are coming. And you get to the middle of the intersection and a semi T bones your car. Poof. Right. That can be both a literal example as well as a figurative of that guide's job is to protect the integrity of your blueprint and your choices. But you became the vessel of an intersection. And that intersectionality could be catastrophically the end of a person in the other vehicle. It could be that, hey, here's your sign, warning, you probably don't want to go that direction, intersectionality. Now that's a drastic example, right? It could be a real life example. You walk away from that car and you might have a scratch in your head, but you walked away and you look back at your car and it's a crumpled mess and everybody's going, how the hell did you walk away from that, right?
Mhm.
It's because you've got an intersectionality blueprint protector. I've seen some really bizarre miracles in the world that if you kind of look at what's actually happened, it's usually a blueprint protector. Like there's a blueprint protector, there's an agent in that dimensional, multidimensional space that has the ability to, I don't know how to explain it, like reach through the veil and like hold a container so that the integrity of our blueprint is held sacrosanct. Now, so I have seen protection entities not be able to affect the physical space in the 3D, but still be able to protect the integrity. I've seen both. There's many different ways of doing it. So you can have contracts with guides that also are soul protectors, as in the integrity of the blueprint type intersectionality. There are entities that we can have as guides that say that part of our karmic, I've actually seen this in a couple greens and blues where they've been in relationships with really, really messy yellow karmic people, and both male and female. And their guides are, their job is to protect their physical body. Like they will have all of these awful, emotional, traumatic things happen to them, but their physical body's protected, not their mental body, right? Like not the mental, spiritual, because the body itself needs to be able to survive the event so that the karma and all of that shit can be worked out, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of different kinds of contracts out there that explain, for lack of a better word, kind of things that happen that don't make sense.
Yeah.
But yet they do make sense in the bigger picture of your blueprint, in the bigger picture of the intersectionality between your contract with someone else and their contract with you, or non-bilateral, like the intersectionality blueprints, soul contracts.
Yeah, it's almost, I would almost see to some extent any contract with our guides is sort of one-sided because we don't really give them much back. We can give them
Yes,
love and thanks, and
well, no, you
well,
can
I guess we
have
give them
two-way.
purpose.
You can have two-way soul contracts with guides. And it's not as common, but it does happen. I have found that there are some interesting criteria that happen with guides that are bilaterally contracted with you. And it seems to have more to do with guides that are prepping to come here
That makes
to
sense.
experience life in this 3D world for the first time. Okay.
That
Or
makes
the
sense.
second time, like they encountered life and they were like, this is fucking weird and
Ugh,
I don't ever
don't
want to
want
do
to do
that
that.
again. Right. I need to be prepared a little bit better next time. And they might contract to be guides lifetime after lifetime for several people to kind of navigate and learn, like, what am I going to do? And because compared to what we think perfection is, that's a whole thing. Compared to what we think perfection is, our guides live in a perfect world where everything is love and light and everything's wonderful, right? It's not really the way it is, but that's the
By
way we
comparison.
perceive it to be in comparison, right? Because everything's kind of dirty and messy here, right? But it's not exactly that way. So there are guides that will match up with someone as part of their team. Sometimes they're primary guide, sometimes they're secondary guide. Like, but they're learning as much from you as you are from them. And there is something different that happens in that relationship that I don't really have words for. I know when it's there because guides will go, oh yeah, that's happening here. And I go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But if you ask me how to put it in words, I can't. I don't know
Yeah.
how to do that.
It's almost like an apprenticeship, but you're watching over Zoom instead of actually being on the ground doing it hands-on. That's kind of what the
Yeah.
guides are doing. They're like,
Yeah.
watch this video, but I'm not gonna go there and actually do the thing in the body yet. But that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that does make sense. So I want to talk a little bit about free will because I
Mm.
think that that's really important in this conversation
Oh, yeah.
because my sense is, as a person that I'm conscious, I know I have soul contracts and I know that I don't have soul contracts, right? Like I have a little
Yeah.
bit of sense of what that feels like differently.
Yep.
When I've left a non-contracted dynamic, that's sad. I might mourn
Mhm.
for years, but there's
Oh, yeah.
also like a sense of resolution and like that
Mhm.
was complete. it was
Mhm.
through whatever. So
Yeah.
when you're actively in a soul contract, because as we've shared, right, they can be temporary. So that can still be like it ends and you're still sad, but you're not contracted anymore. So you don't feel that. But when
Right.
it's a lifelong or a long term, people still have free will to turn their back on that contract
Oh, yeah.
and try to walk away. What does that look like? What happens when that occurs that we abandon a soul contract?
Abandon's a really terrible word for that.
Walk away from?
I would say I like how you use the phrase free will, because I think I probably use the word choice too much because
Mm,
I don't have a better word for that. Um, but we make decisions all the time, right? So if you've got an apple and a banana and you're like, I feel like an apple today and not a banana, that's a choice. Nobody's going to chop your head off or lop off your arm if you choose the apple over the banana,
right.
unless there's some weirdo next to you trying to chop off your arm. Like that's a whole different thing. Um,
Unless you're in a Saw film or some craziness.
right,
Yeah.
right. But choice and free will are integral to everything. We've talked about null voids before. If you ever
Mhm.
want to know anything about that, there's a whole podcast on it. But you can choose to be on your blueprint. Most of us choose to be on our blueprint. Null voids, people who choose to not be on their blueprint are fairly rare. It's not as common as the movies tell you.
Right.
Just going to say that. Um, but it's the same thing in our blueprint. Like we can get really, really to the edge of our blueprint, choosing, no, I don't want that branch. I don't want that branch. But the job of your team is to constantly offer you the opportunity to get back on the track that you chose. This is the thing about blueprints. Nobody wrote it for you. There's nobody standing over your head with the axe saying you have to learn this thing. There is no higher power that says you have to do it in a certain order. I have never, ever, ever had any guide. I don't care which ones I've ever come across, and I've traveled the world. No one has ever said, ever, that anyone else is writing your blueprint but you.
Hmm.
You, the entity, that quantumly connected, multidimensional, vast self that you are, wrote your contract, your blueprint, made the agreements in your blueprint. So that also means you get here and you're like, yeah, this is an opportunity. I don't like it. You can say I don't like that. I don't like this choice. You can choose a different thing. Does that mean you're going to leap off your blueprint, all of a sudden become a dark entity? If you're asking yourself that question, probably not. Just
Yeah.
it's kind of like when you go into therapy and you say, "Oh my god, I think I'm turning into a narcissist." The therapist goes, "If you're asking yourself that question, you're probably not a narcissist." Like things like that. Like if you're even asking the question, you're probably fine. Um but there is something about how people think that there's a perfect choice.
Hmm.
And that isn't a thing. When you
Yeah.
write your blueprint, we can't really get to our multidimensional self. That's why we write blueprints. That's why we have vibrational frequencies. We can only access so much at a time. You gave yourself many choices, okay? You might think it's a bit between a banana and an apple, and you like both, and you stand there for 15 minutes going, but I like both, but I don't know which one I want, but I can only have one. Like that's you. That is you. That is not the banana or the apple's fault. Okay?
Why not choose both? Be polyfruiterous.
Right. You could be polyfruiterous if you wanted, but maybe your tummy's only so big and you have to cut the apple in half and the banana in half, and you still can have two. That is an option. Too many people want our blueprint and our soul agreements to be black and white, right
Yeah.
and wrong, perfect, imperfect. I get that question all the time. And sometimes I get the questions and I'm like, you've already made the decision. Why are you even asking me? Like,
Right.
you've already made the decision. If you ask me the question, I'll basically work my way around to what your guides are saying. And then I get people nodding and going, yeah, 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 yeah. And I'm like, then
Yeah, I
why
already
did you
knew
even ask
that.
me that
Thanks.
question? Because your guides are telling me what you already have decided.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
And
am I
that's
doing? I'm
right.
validating, which is my job, right? That is my job, is to validate. Also to correct when you get trapped in the banana apple problem. Like,
The uncertainty, this goes back to what we started with. Like, people are really uncomfortable to be uncertain and to like, we
that's
wanna know
life.
how the story is gonna end, and that part isn't really written into our blueprint. The part about how the story
You
ends
have
and
a
the path it
choice.
takes.
Yes. Oh my God, you can we build exit points into our blueprint. I have a unique person that I know who has so many exit points for the rest of their physical life, basically one a day for the rest of their life. It is the most amazing blueprint ever. Like, there is so much free choice in that. And occasionally, it can probably make that person feel a little bit like, why the hell am I here? But I've also met this person that I'm thinking of is the first person I had met where they had fulfilled all their contracts in their life by the time they were in their 20s. Like, all the
Wow.
contracts are done. So their choice to be here they're in their 40s. And every day they wake up going, I choose to be here. Is that not the most beautiful thing? Like, oh my God, it just makes my heart sing. I'm just so excited because too many times I run across people who are like, okay, I got to slog through this thing. And I'm like, why?
Because
Why
I
do you have
have
to slog
to.
through the thing?
I
But
have
why?
to.
But why? I don't understand the why. I am confused, right? There's this beauty of choice that in a contract you can say, you know what, this contract did serve me and it is wonderful and it is great. And I can be okay with letting that go. We're back to that communication thing. And this
Mhm.
is where I tell people, like, you can reject contracts, but this is why I tell people all the time, we have to learn how to be in community again. We have to
Yep.
learn how to talk to each other. We need to learn how to be authentic and have difficult conversations and it be uncomfortable and it hurt a little bit because it's messy here.
Very messy.
And that can help so much with these contracts.
I mean, the core crux of it all, no matter what, again, going back to purpose, why would we sign a contract, right? To work through karma or maybe for a mission or a purpose
Yep.
requires communication. Like, all of this human journey comes down to how do we express ourselves and listen to what's being expressed back.
Mhm.
Like, we need to relearn how to be in relationship, and that is what a lot of these contracts are probably about at this point in time, is learning how to be in relationship again, to unwind the karma that keeps
Mhm.
disrupting and creating trauma for people, which is
Yeah.
divisive and causes us to not be connected in the first place, right? And then people like me who are literally in mission driven contracts to change the world and
Yes.
bring more love and peace and harmony into the world. Like, these are important things, and ultimately at the end of the day, I just want to go back to non-hierarchy,
Yeah.
and that every person is
Mhm.
a person we can learn from. Every
Mhm.
communication can grow us. We don't have to have these quote unquote special connections, but there's also purpose behind those connections. So
Every
can
single
we
one.
honor that? Can we honor each individual connection? So as we get down to the end of our time today, I just kind of want to wrap up with the question that, like, how might we view soul contracts in a more empowered way, that can really make our day-to-day lives a little easier? So of course for me, I'm like, remember that everybody is special, every human,
Yeah.
every animal, every plant, every entity is special. So don't
Yes.
put so much pressure on yourself to feel like you have to figure out where your contracts are, or who's what, or any of that. Like, can you just be in the connection and see what is there and communicate? So that's what I want to offer. But do you have any other empowering ideas about soul contracts?
Probably. Um, I think that probably the first one that always comes to mind was probably one of my first, like, both as a child and then also when I became a mom. Both experiences. I have gone back to this fundamental, and for a long time I called it a belief, but I actually had my guide correct me recently. And I was very humbled in that moment, going, oh, I guess it's not a belief. It's just a thing about how contracts are written. And my guide said to me, they were like, you've understood it because you're aware of contracts. When people aren't aware of contracts, they don't know what you know. So when I was a kiddo and when I became a parent, one of the things that I was adamant to pass on to my kids was, yes, I carried you in my body and I grew you from a tiny little seedling into a full human meat suit and I gave birth to you. Great. And it was my contracted responsibility to give them everything I could possibly give them in a very short amount of time. I only had my kids with me full time for a very short amount of time in my life. And I knew that. I knew that ending was coming. Talk about pre-grieving. I was a
Mm,
mess pretty much
yeah.
the whole time my kids were small. But there was, and after they got older, I'm still a little bit of a mess about the whole thing because it's a lesson for me, clearly.
Right.
But there's also I knew that it was a temporary bilateral contract with both of my children. And I have always looked at parenting a little differently than a lot of people do. And I've always looked at it as you only have them for a little while, and then they grow into their own place in the world with their own contracts. And you, as a parent, I think of as parenting as giving them all the things I could possibly think of that I could give them in the best way that I knew how at the time. And I used to say this all the time, I have to trust that it's going to be okay. And looking at any contract now, any potential choice, any potential intersectionality. I mean, I had fairly recent, you and I have a commonality of this person in our lives, and I knew there was a contract there. I still don't know if it was bilateral or one way. Never figured that part out. I'm okay with that. And I was sad from the very beginning that I kind of figured it wouldn't last
Mm,
because I can, again, back to that love, that care, that depth of knowing the love and the goodness of this entity in this meat suit, right? And also having to trust that it's gonna be okay. And it is gonna be okay. And it is okay. And it turned out okay. And it's all okay. So contracts can be for a little while, and you can know that and you can feel it and you can still give your all. I think what
mhm.
we tend to do with our trauma responses, especially people in karma that have trauma after trauma after trauma, is, well, if it's going to end, why would I put all of myself into that?
Right.
Why would I give of myself if it's just going to end and it's going to hurt? Well, yeah, because that's what we do here. We hurt each other and we help each other and we're learning from each other. If you go through life never feeling anything, are you really learning all the things you could be learning?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So fundamentally, the best thing I tell people is live with all of your intersectionalities with fullness and love, and believe that it will turn out okay. Maybe not out okay in the ideal, like this friend. Like, I would love that this friendship could be ideally this whole other thing. Of course, I have an imaginary ideal of what that is. I'm human. And at the same time that I could constantly keep that imagining going, I knew it had a exit point, it had a termination, it had a period at the end of the sentence. I don't know how you want to phrase all these things, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And I still gave my everything. I gave my everything to that relationship.
Yeah.
And I know that I gave my everything. Just with my kids, I know I gave my everything. I know I did my best. I know I gave them all the things that they could possibly need to get from me. And I can still love them and care about them and hope and wish for more because I want more. I'm human. I always want more. Like, one bag of chips is not enough. How about 3? Right? So I'm sick of chips. We do that with our relationships. We do that with our interactions.
Yeah.
That's okay. That also doesn't mean you stop living your life and trying to live in a fantasy that isn't going to exist, right? Like,
Right.
does that explain
Yeah. Yeah. I
better?
just, I take from that still this thing of show up in unconditional love and be with people. And whether we're contracted or not, whether it's short term or long term, can we give our all to the people that we're connected with, to the other beings we're connected with? And
Mhm,
can we continue to lift each other up in learning ultimately?
mhm.
And that love. So I hope this sheds some light for our listeners and that you have a little bit more understanding about soul contracts. I'm finally going to say what we're talking about next now so that as we're wrapping up, we don't get on the soapbox. We're going to go even deeper next time into this by talking about twin flames and how they're not a real thing. And
No,
so
nope,
that's going to
they're
be
not a
a
real thing.
real spicy soapbox
Mm.
because a lot of people think that they're looking for that special contract. And hopefully, this foundation will help you and us go even deeper into that conversation. So, we will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Super excited to announce that in the near future, this will be coming to audio podcast form, not just video podcast form. So people will be able to listen to it on the go on Spotify, Apple, Google, etc. So that will be coming in the near future. And if there is a topic you want us to cover, we literally have the first 28 episodes of this planned out, but we're happy to insert a different topic in there if there's
Oh,
something
yeah.
you really, really want to hear about before then. So
And listen to that intuition. Reach out to us because it is one of those things that sometimes the world needs a thing, and we don't know that the world needs a thing until somebody says it.
and then 3 people say it, and then I go, "Okay, we're doing that."
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the
That
thing.
is a real thing. So until next time, my friends, we love you, we see you, we believe in you, we're cheering you on, and we'll be back soon to keep breaking the barriers. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.